business is to approve the April 2012 minutes. That's the green one. Has anybody had a chance to read these? What do you think, Bill?
Well, as well as I can read them, and as good as my English is, they look good. I move that we accept them.
They're bigger than usual.
Is there a second? If not, we can't do anything.
I don't know if Jamie and I paid our dues, so.
Well, that can be rectified real quick.
Yep, we need to check with you.
Actually, Michael really might want to know about that. Some of you might remember him if you've watched the show that stars Tom Elkmo over here on public access TV. They've shown it like 200 times so far. You'll recognize Michael because he got up and asked a question. He's a resident of Alma, and he had a good question, and he's here tonight. So if you want to become a member, dues are $5 a year, and that allows you to vote on things. Hi,
Well,
Sally.
it also gets him a copy of the DVD.
Yes, I already gave him one.
Do we have a second?
I probably can afford $5. I was afraid it'd be more than that.
I don't know if we ever got a second.
Well,
Yeah,
we can get you on a payment plan too. I mean, we offer all
I
kinds
almost
of.
need that, you know.
I'll second.
Right. Here, let me. I gotta get your name.
And now we'll move on to the May 2012 minutes. Has anybody had a chance to read them? So if you could make a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve.
All right, is there a second?
Who was that?
Sally
I'll second.
Sally Church.
Who moved?
Bill Schroeder.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll receive both of those into the record. Treasurer's report, Gary.
All right, for the month of May, in our general fund checking, we had we began the month with $2,874.14, and we had an ending checkbook balance of $3,531.66, and I had a bank statement that agreed with that. And during the month, we had an ASAP transfer of $2,398.50, interest of 11 cents, and the bank returned $3 that they overcharged us accidentally for giving us a paper statement last month. And essentially, we're not supposed to be charged for that. We had expenditures of $1,694.09 for our technical advisor, and we had $50 for Ogle Computers, totaling $1,749.09. In our money market account, we began the month with $86,598.06. Interest for the month was $16.61. That continues to go down. So we're going to think about looking back to where we were with the money market mutual fund kind of deal. And so we ended the month with $86,614.67. And again, included in that amount is what's left over on our Carter Award of $786.19. And Jane already mentioned, to become a member, one frog skin, and those t-shirts are going fast and furious tonight. I hate to use those words, but fast and furious. Kind of a buzzword today, wasn't it? Executive privilege, all that kind of stuff. But $11, last year's prices. And what else we got? I think that's all I've got.
Oh, well, the next names that you see on your agenda, the first one is John Baker, usually sits right about here, and he's got the white hair and a little deaf. His son met with a tragic end this last month, and we did send a card from our group to him. And I've seen John and I've seen Jane, and given them my condolences and also from the group. So just to let you know about that. doesn't have to have further treatment, so we're real happy about that. But I think the most interesting thing to me, other than the gross details,
I have pictures too, but I'll bring it next month if anybody's interested.
is that his tumor, his cancerous tumor was, the specialist said that it most likely comes from environmental exposure, which means chemical exposure. So. And then Phil Ramsey showed up today for the technical committee meeting, but he's in a lot of pain, so he went home. He had surgery Monday to fix 3 aneurysms in his leg up into his abdomen. So I was amazed that he came at all. If you remember last month, there was a wonderful presentation about signs, and I know Theo has vowed to follow the 333 rule now. And so he recommended 2 books last month, and I ordered a copy of each. And I have read them kind of fast, I looked at the pictures anyway. And I would be glad to loan them to anybody else that's interested in reading up on signage, especially signs for, most of these have to do with parks and things like that. The one thing that I think, after reading these, is that when we do have a sign to explain what's going on at the plant site or the history or whatever we want to explain, it should have a little roof over it. Those kinds of signs really pull people in. They want to see what's in there, and then they read what's there. So that was the one thing I took away, just with my quick look. Tom, I think, you can give your EPA report, but I don't think you have much to say about the record of decision.
What do you want me to do?
Not yet, they're down here. You know, you gotta follow the agenda.
Yeah, the record of decision, it's, I probably would anticipate it's going to be signed any day. As far as I know, it's on our division director's desk, and he's the ultimate decision authority. He has that authority, so it should be any day. As soon as I get it signed, we'll ship it out to you guys. It'll be any day, and the work starts immediately. I certainly will be, as soon as the ROD sign, we'll send it to Jay. We're going to need access to the bankruptcy trust money for remedial design, and also the city then can start sending us invoices for well field issue, and so, the project will begin.
Great.
So you're still taking junk out of the interceptor trench?
Oh yeah, 20,000 gallons a week, still going off site, nothing, every week, 20,000 gallons.
So it hasn't gotten less, it's still...
No, we can pump, we basically pump it, because it fills up, we pump it out. So it's still on average 20,000 gallons. It varies, something like that. We're still getting high contaminants, still costing 30 cents a gallon to get rid of.
And that's the contaminated water, or that's not
Water.
the
DNAPL, we're only removing DNAPL, once a year at most, because we're only getting, a few hundred gallons, just waiting until we get enough. The contaminated water gets removed every week. You probably periodically see tanker trucks leaving the site. That's what that is. Eventually, when we get the water treatment plant, once we get the water treatment plant built, it will be treated on site. Yeah, Terry.
When you remove liquid contaminants from the site, what type of trucks do you remove that with? Do you water it, or do you use like
It's groundwater.
tanker for liquids?
It's all liquid. It goes into a special hazardous waste tanker truck. Okay, so it's not, there's not solids in it. If there's solids in it, it's essentially dissolved in the groundwater. But no, it's not like it's the sediment or any of that. It's essentially a tanker truck that's specialized to carry those types of hazardous waste.
Gary, would you like to report on the free fishing derby?
Oh, yeah, Sharon's not here. Well...
Why don't you stand up? There's the camera.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just one of many people who helped out at the free fishing derby. I didn't get a number. It looked like we didn't have as good a show as we had the previous years. when the hot dogs got served, man, I don't know where they all came from, but it filled that whole park up. So I don't know if everybody was just hungry or if they were all fishing somewhere else or how that worked, but
Did they eat all the hot dogs?
there weren't very many left.
We cooked, I think, we cooked 600 hot dogs.
But you hit it pretty close because there was maybe about that many, you know, in that little deal. And yeah, I maybe had 3 or 4 of them. But I wasn't the only one doing that. So I worked the park out by Westgate. And Jane, you were down along the residential properties that they gave us permission for. And, you know, I don't know what you saw down there, but the amount of fish caught was down. I saw one unhealthy fish, bluegill, in that same 8-inch age class. Had little sores just about everywhere, on its nose, on its back, tail, belly. But every other fish we saw was, you know, fine looking fish. 8-inch bluegills were pretty much the run of the day. 16-inch suckers, 16-inch largemouth, and I think a 14-inch smallmouth. And what else got caught down there?
Well,
An 8-inch turtle.
Yeah,
That was a mouthful of
over
worm.
by the dam was where they caught the big ones.
No, but
Like,
Didn't you get any carp?
there were no large carp caught, and the dam fish. The fishing at the dam wasn't as good as in the past years, and low water and warm, and this whole seasonal thing with the the early spring and everything kind of messed things up, I think, for all fishing. But it just wasn't as great. And the big fish actually, I think, came from up to Lepine Park.
Yeah. We took a couple of hooks out of fish up and didn't catch it.
yeah.
The bass looked all right, but there's a couple of bluegills, 6 to 8 inches that had, the delts on it.
So the Masons were there. They gave away some bikes. Gave away. They have a new program this year, which I thought was pretty cool. I'm not sure what their affiliation, but they're sponsoring it, and it's something to do with tracking the DNA of your kid, so you can get registered. And it's something to do with your dental. And they hook you all up, get you into the computer. And then all you have to do is go home and do something with this envelope. And I don't know if you chew on it or what you do, but then you send it in, and they've got you. So if you happen to come up missing,
Yeah, that
they
weird.
can
No,
track
it's
you down.
if your kids get lost.
Yeah,
You
I
can
know.
explain that part.
Did I? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm just trying to,
They got you. You're a Mason for life now.
I bet they had like secret club.
from cradle to grave, they've got you. But, and a lot of kids signed up for that. A lot of people came just for that and then left. And so I thought that was pretty neat. Overall, I think everybody had a good time. The weather was great, and I think the family was pretty happy with how it turned out.
Yep.
And of course, Joe, it was named after Joe Schultz. He passed away last year. He was the mayor. He was the founder of that. I think this was the 14th year. And the family debated what they were going to do and decided, well, we're going to keep it. We're going to do it. And this year was the memorial, and then from here on it'll just be the Joe Schultz Fishing Derby. And I'm assuming the family's going to continue with it. Is that?
I didn't ever hear a complete answer to that.
I didn't either.
How about the billboard you guys did?
Wasn't that awesome?
And that was all donated by Lamar, who has a lot of these billboards around town. And, so beyond that, everybody got a prize, and that was one of the nice things about it being free. You don't have to buy a license, and everybody walks away with a prize, whoever signs up. And a lot of donations, a lot of good times. So I don't know anything more about it.
Well, I seem to remember, maybe Theo remembers, I think the biggest fish was that 28-inch carp. Is that what it was?
No, that
Or not carp, pike.
Pike, yeah.
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 That's right.
And that was over by the dam, so they got a big one over there.
And that's small compared to the previous winners.
Yeah.
You get multiple.
36-inch carp. There were carp jumping and spawning all across the other side of, they were rocking all over on the other side of the river.
actually had 3 people show up with pails full of fish.
Again. Every year.
And all 3 of them found me for some reason.
Funny how it works.
I don't know if somebody pointed, go talk to that guy. But I pointed him to Sharon. Joe's wife. I said, no, Sharon's the boss. You need to talk to Sharon. And I think probably the only thing I walked away with as a learning for future years is we really need to encourage the family to make sure that the rules, the locations,
Yeah.
because these guys were fishing in,
Happens every year. Every year someone shows
Different
up with a
places.
random bucket of fish.
and they were all 3 very surprised they didn't have a clue.
Really.
As you can figure out, Theo was there with one of his daughters and another little boy of a friend. The little boy caught a fish.
Yeah, yeah.
First time fishing for him. And his daughter wanted to help with the hot dogs, so I took her over to where Bill and Doug Yost were cooking hot dogs, and she was able to help with, I don't know what exactly she did.
She was pleased as a peach.
Yeah.
Doing something with hot dogs.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, she was putting the hot dogs in the bun and then wrapping it with aluminum foil.
Oh, good for
okay.
her.
She was a good worker.
Melissa, is Ed,
Ed's going to call at 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock, okay. Terry, it's your turn then, to tell us about the dead birds in your yard. You have to go up front.
Make me do that.
If we have to stand up, you have to.
As most of you know, I usually find dead robins in my yard every spring, and usually it's around probably anywhere from 6 to 10. So, in the past, I had collected them and put them in my freezer, as I was directed by Scott Cornelius, and they weren't picked up for 3 years, so they couldn't be tested. They had been left too long. So this year, I collected, the first 2 birds that I collected, I took down to MSU, to the Michigan Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Disease Laboratory. And they tested the birds, and I brought pictures for anyone that would like to see them, and the necropsy records. And the diagnosis for both birds was poisoning organochlorine, which is, they were poisoned from the DDE and DDT and DDD. So,
Does the report say that specifically or just organochlorines? Does it list the specific chemicals?
the diagnosis said poisoning or organochlorine, and then it had the test results on here.
Okay.
And it shows.
Okay.
And when I talked to the professor over the phone, who did the necropsies, he stated that it was definitely from the DDE and DDT. So.
Because there are a lot of other organochlorine poisons.
Right,
Yeah, yeah,
right.
okay.
And they did test for those, and there's copies of what they tested for.
Okay.
Tell them how many parts per million the different birds have, of the DDE at least.
The DDE on the male bird was 237.863 parts per million.
Yeah.
And on the female bird, it was 254.978 parts per million.
Did Peter
Peter's-
have a comment?
Ouch.
Yes.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that?
Those are pretty high then.
Yeah, those are pretty high.
They're probably being either of them, something that's sitting in a high DET soil. Or one of the things that happens with some birds is that they will target some sort of material. Now, if this DDE it's highly likely that it's, birds or some sort of prey.
You have to repeat what he said.
Okay, he says that they're probably targeting a contaminated soil or they're feeding on something like worms that are from a contaminated
Right.
soil. Yeah.
Right. Did he want to know the amounts of DDT?
You want to know DDT?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yes.
That was 12.484 parts per million on the female and 1.922 parts per million on the male.
So 12 and 2 parts per million for the 2 birds of DDT.
They also had
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense because DDT breaks down to DDT and DDT.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they also had DDD.
Then they have DDD, yeah.
So I have the reports here and the cover letters attached that I sent down to MSU, along with pictures of the birds and where they were located. These 2 birds that I sent to MSU were located right at my sump, and that's where I usually find most of them every year. And I have 3 more birds in my freezer. Chris Douglas from Weston Solutions is having someone pick them up on Monday. There are 3 of them, and I'll be sending information and pictures about those.
Any questions for Terry?
Yeah. I live on Hazen Street, and on the corner of Hazen and Euclid, there's a girl that walks down my house all the time. There's 6 dead birds in that vacant lot.
There are 6 dead birds there?
At that vacant lot there on Hazel and Euclid. She was telling me that when I went home after the technical meeting.
Do you know what kind they were?
I have no idea.
When did you see him?
Today.
Well, look when I go home tonight. That's
Yeah.
my neighborhood.
Is it? Okay. That vacant lot right there on the corner.
They're right there along the roadway where you'd walk.
Yeah, so she walks over my house all the time. She says she found 6 birds that are dead there.
Wow.
I found one in my little trough I have by the side of the house. It was a dead starling.
I think it'd be a good idea if people around the whole town did a little collecting of the dead birds and just get a few more tested and just see how widespread it is in the town.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
So-
He lives over here on Pine Street, at 214, North Pine, or 209, excuse me. We went out the back door one day, and we moved from there in 1989. There were probably 50 dead birds in our backyard, right under a big spruce tree.
Were they blackbirds?
I can't remember what they were, but I remember all those dead birds.
Bird epidemic, yeah. So
That was
if
over-
people were to keep track of that, what do you suggest? Everybody just keep track and where's all the information go or how's that?
I have no idea. Organize it.
I'm here to James' phone number.
You got a big freezer?
Just saying, I got James' phone number.
You can't decide what to do unless you keep track. Right,
Does anyone
Gene?
have a chest freezer we can use?
Well, so what are you guys doing all day long besides keeping track of your own birds?
Well,
Would
I'm
you
going
like
to
to
be
be our
going back
bird
to
people?
work soon, so.
Would you like to be our bird people?
No.
Well, you got to move back home.
I can do that if I'm supplied a freezer. Because I'm about done with having dead things in my freezer.
Right. But no, if you could just be the information person where they could call and find out where to contact this wildlife lab and
And how to get them
how
here.
to collect them, because you know now
Yep.
how to do all that.
Yep,
So
sure.
that'd be great.
Okay.
So you can give Linda Gittleman your phone number?
Okay.
And then
Peter has a
maybe we can
question.
get you on our website too.
Yeah.
Yes, Peter.
Did the lab give a good information sheet on what to do in terms of collecting and storage and labeling?
Okay, did the lab give you good information on what to do for collecting and storing and labeling the birds?
They did.
Okay,
They did, yes.
so yes.
Great.
Great.
Cool.
This was found in, these birds were found in one part of your yard, is that right?
No, 3 of the birds were found by my sump.
Your sump pump?
Yes.
Where it empties out.
Where it empties out into
Her
the yard.
basement sump empties out.
One of them was found on the other side of our privacy fence, laying right up against the fence. We have a tree in our backyard where we have nesting robins, and it was right below the tree in my neighbor's yard. And then there was another one was found laying next to the orange fence out front.
They're all essentially in her yard.
In my
just
yard,
outside
yeah.
the boundaries a little bit.
Another one was under on one of my vehicles that I found. So, and I don't know what happened to those pictures. I brought them to the.
Oh, I bet you Steve took them.
He probably did.
Laying next to him, I bet he picked everything up.
I have extras at home, so
Well, they look very peaceful. I mean, they're just laying there dead. I mean,
yeah, they just kind of dropped over. So if anyone would like to see the reports, I have them up here. And I don't know. I also have, if I can do that, it's a letter from Grant and Dolores.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a letter here from Grant and Dolores Culthorpe. They live 2 doors down from me. And there's been discussion about the contamination in the front of our houses there. All of us that have the orange fences. That maybe Phil was brought in from the Belsicol site to fill in low-lying spots. Grant and Dolores have been in their home for 49 years. They're like right at the entrance of the Belsicol site. And said that they're stating in this letter, they've never filled off at the Belsicol site. They've never filled out front with any dirt. And the 3 houses right there, her daughter owns the house next door to her, and then there's mine. She said none of those 3 houses in almost the 50 years they've been there has there ever been any fill. So, because I know there was some discussion on that, whether we had put fill in our yards.
Can I ask a question? Does your sump run all the time?
Not all the time, not when it's dry.
No, I'm just wondering whether you've got a leak in your basement, whether there's a small spring in your basement or.
My basement does leak. It's a Michigan basement. It leaks on the one wall and it runs across the whole floor to the other side of the basement to the sump.
So basically, it don't leak just when it rains, it does leak when it doesn't rain.
Pretty much it just leaks when it's raining. I mean, the ground has to be wet to get any moisture, so.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, if it's raining or wet outside, my basement's wet.
Is it clear or does it have sediment in it? You know, what does it look like?
Across my basement
When it runs
floor?
across, yeah, when it runs across and comes in,
It's dirty,
so it does have some soil.
yes.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah.
Did you have a question? Yes, Josh.
Okay. Thanks, Terry. Steve asked me to just give a preliminary report on fish data from two areas of the Pine River. And then next month, when he can be here, he wants to give a more complete report. But this is encouraging data. He kind of took these tables out of a whole bunch of them, but it's centered on carp.
you say that again louder?
Hey, video.
So that was from, those were fish collected in the impoundment area behind the dam there. And then downstream, I just have two sets of numbers. The 97 numbers were all high. Almost every fish was in the double digits, and some of them were as high as 61 parts per million. And by 2010, there was one fish they caught. He must have been an old one. He had 12 parts per million in him, almost 13 parts per million. But most of the others were much less than that. There was one that had 9 parts per million, but the others were 2 and 3 and 1 and fractions. So definite improvement in the uptake of DDT in the fish. And carp live a long time, don't they? I mean, they would take a while for them to die out, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but if the loading is reduced, that they will actually lose DDT over time. It's not permanent.
Well, it doesn't accumulate in their system then.
Well, it does accumulate, but they can lose it over time if the water and the sediment are cleaner.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Early data, some real early studies indicated it's permanent. They can get rid of it, but we've seen this at other sites with BCDs and the like. If we do the cleanup right, we'll see the fish drop faster than we thought it would from the literature.
Well, it's very exciting.
This is exciting. Yes.
So moving on, if you remember from last month, we had quite a discussion on the sampling techniques that are being planned for the residential yards. And so Tom Alcamo from EPA brought some of his friends to talk to us about sampling, the sampling techniques, but also risk assessment, because the two are kind of linked together in how they determine a sampling technique and what the samples are telling them, the numbers are telling them. So I'll turn it over to Tom, and you can introduce them now.
I guess first I'll start a little bit with regard to the birds. We had a good discussion this afternoon with Terry. I think, EPA, we had set an environmental cleanup number lower than the human health number for DDT in the residential area. And so we're going to address this problem. We certainly are glad Terry was diligent in terms of getting the birds, getting those samples. It helps me to justify get money when we see, unfortunately, these environmental effects that happen. But in any case, we've got a conservative cleanup number that was developed by Dr. Jim Chapman. So in any case, we feel comfortable we're going to get this problem solved, get the neighborhood solved. And so kind of just wanted to lay that out there. Secondly is just to give you a general idea where I'm going with things in the next 6 months. The ROD is going to be signed, hopefully tomorrow, today, whenever. The project starts then. I think it's really important for EPA and with concurrence with the state to deal with there's 10 properties that have fences. And we're going to try to get those addressed this year. We get the contracting in place, do the sampling on those 10 properties, excavate the material that's inside those orange fences, sample that property, and then if it's still contaminated, excavate those areas. And my guys here will talk a little bit more about that. And then also do some additional sampling in the residential area so that next year you'd be able to finish up the cleanup. We will not get this cleanup done this year. There is no way in heck that we can get this done this year, but we can try to address these 10 houses that had dealt with this problem for a long time, and that's kind of the approach that we're going to be taking. So just to give you a general idea. So we'll start talking soon to the residents regarding access and sampling and things like that. And so I thought after last month's meeting I'd bring in some of our experts here. If you have any ecological questions, Dr. Jim Chapman, who's been involved in this project, who helped develop the ecological cleanup numbers here. Also, Keith Kaczynski, Dr. Keith Kaczynski, he's a human health risk assessment. You may have seen him along with Jim maybe a few years ago. He did a presentation at the church. I thought it would be good to have Keith here to kind of explain what these numbers mean, and these cleanup numbers and how these numbers are calculated and what it all means. And then John Canar in the red, and Chuck Raw in the blue, who are our EPA, they're in our, something we call our field trooper, who do sampling. And they essentially are experts in doing sampling design and have done a number of projects, residential projects across our entire Midwest. So, like I said, I thought that'd give you guys a general idea about the approach we're taking. We've not developed any of the details yet in terms of the sampling plan, but we're starting to kind of scope it. So we just wanted to get you guys informed and kind of get your thoughts in terms of where we're going with it. So Keith, I'll let you start in terms of your presentation.
Okay, as Tom said, he asked me to come in and explain to you these screening levels that we use. And I want you to understand what they are, where they come from, how pertinent they are to you, or if they even apply. I'm going to do this by 3 objectives. One is to explain what goes into a screening level. I also want to explain what an exposure unit is. And with that, to understand the concept of real-life sampling. So objective 1, what goes into the screening level? If you go online and search for screening levels, whether it's the US EPA regional screening levels or the Michigan Part 201 screening levels, you get these tables with a bunch of numbers on them. Here we see DDD, DDE, DDT. They show you groundwater protection numbers, indoor air, ambient air, direct contact. For soil, they look at direct contact. They're actually looking at these in parts per billion. We normally do parts per million in soil. So you've heard the numbers 45, 95, 57 for these 3 chemicals. But where do they come from? What do they mean? That's what I'm here to tell you. In order to make up these numbers, there's 3 steps. 1 is toxicity assessment. 2 is assumption determinations. And 3 is the screening level calculations. Toxicity assessment is done in a lab. These are with people of MSU, U of M, everywhere else do, where they have all these animals. And they feed them these chemicals, no matter what they are, at different doses, and find out what are the effects of these chemicals. Do they cause cancer? Do they cause kidney failure? Do they cause neurological effects? What do they do? If it's a non-cancer value, there's a threshold. As an example, we'll think of Tylenol. If you look at a bottle of Tylenol, it tells you a dose. If you take that dose every day of your life and follow that dose, you'll get rid of your headaches, but you won't have any detrimental health effects. If you start going over that dose and exceed the threshold, you end up with liver damage. There's a threshold for non-cancer effects. Cancer is different. There is no threshold. It doesn't matter if you take 1 puff of a cigarette in your lifetime or smoke 3 packs a day for 30 years. Cancer is cancer. It all adds up. All these insults to your body add up together, and they lead to cancer. So let's talk non-cancer for a minute, just so you can understand this. If these people find out in the lab that if you take a mouse and feed them a chemical, whatever it is, if you give them less than 100 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day, they're fine. They'll have no detrimental health effects. But if you exceed that number, they start having kidney problems or whatever. It's a threshold. Now the scientists say, what happens in a mouse happens in a human. That may be true, but is the dose the same? We're not sure. So what we do is we take this number for a human and we divide it by 10. So we say that you can give a person 10 milligrams per kilogram per day and they'll have no detrimental health effects. However, there's a problem with that. We're all different. My liver function may be better than yours, your immune system may be better than mine. Everybody's different. The older populations are more sensitive. Pregnant women carrying fetuses, they're more sensitive. So we have to divide by 10 again. So now we come up with what's called a reference dose. This says that we can give any person in the world 1 milligram per kilogram per day of this chemical, whatever it is, and it should have no detrimental health effects. It's a reference dose. And we're going to come back to this later. These little divide by 10, they're called uncertainty factors. This is an uncertainty factor of 100. The highest they can go is 3,000. But those uncertainty factors become safety factors. They're already built into this number before we even start calculating a screening level. Chemicals of concern here are carcinogens. So we're going to concentrate on the cancer endpoint since these concentrations are more protected. If you develop a screening level for a chemical that causes cancer effects and non-cancer effects, the screening level for cancer will always be lower. It'll always be more protected for cancer. So how are the cancer numbers done? Same thing. Scientists sit in the lab and they feed mice various concentrations of these chemicals and they wait for a period of time. We'll say 5 years. After 5 years, they look and say, okay, this dose here, whatever it is, 10% of our mice have developed cancer. Now, could they say that that dose is the threshold dose? They can't, because cancer is a bizarre little thing. Sometimes it shows up in 5 years, sometimes 10, sometimes 20, sometimes 70. So they can't say this dose is a dose for cancer. The other thing is, maybe they're looking at liver cancers, and they're missing everything else that's there. So what they have to do is they take this dose and they extrapolate the line back and they get a number called a slope factor in milligrams per kilogram per day, just like the reference dose. So for the chemicals that you have here, these are your slope factors. This is the amount that you can have in milligrams per kilogram per day, and you should not develop cancer. So that's the first part. That's the toxicity assessment. Next are the assumptions. When you look at these tables, you look at residential screening levels. Well, what does a residential screening level mean? It means that someone lives at their house, stays at their house, never leaves their house, 24 hours a day, 350 days per year. We let you leave for 2 weeks for vacation for 30 years. These screening levels are based on something that's never going to happen, but it's extremely protected. If you're looking at a commercial industrial, so you're looking at, I'm at this place, I'm working 8 hours a day, but what's the screening level for that? Those numbers are based on 8 hours per day, 250 days a year, for 25 years. What if you only work there 5 years? Do these numbers actually pertain to you? No, they're more protective. They over-assume these assumptions in order to protect you. We make other assumptions when it comes to these numbers. We assume that a child, during the first 6 years of life, weighs 15 kilograms or about 33 pounds. We also assume an adult weighs 70 kilograms or about 154 pounds. We take all your skin out and lay it on the floor and measure it. This is your surface area of your skin for a child, an adult. We assume that a child eats 200 milligrams of soil a day, be it from dust, dirt, whatever. That's about the Lay's potato chip, not Ruffles, Lay's. Weighs about 230 milligrams. So that's the weight of soil a child will eat a day. We eat about 100 as adults. A child ingests 1 liter of water per day. We as adults do 2 liters. And I said before, residential exposure, 24 hours a day, 350 days a year for 30 years. This is the 30 years. Your first 6 years of life plus the next 24. That's where all these numbers come from. So the US EPA recommends that a cancer risk, lifetime access cancer risk of 1 in a million. What this means is if you take 1 million people, put them on one of these contaminated yards for 30 years, there's a chance that one of them might get cancer from your yard. That's our recommended screening level. Now, in all truth, just from being alive in today's society, if you're female, your chance of getting cancer is 1 in 3. If you're male, it's 1 in 2 of any type of cancer. So we're trying to protect you from a risk that's really, really minor compared to what the real world scenario is. This is our recommended screening level, 1 in a million. We will accept between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in a million. Once you get above 1 in 10,000, that's automatically a removal action. Something has to be done right now. State of Michigan's 201 screening levels in the table I just showed you are based on 1 in 100,000. So basically, if we take 1 million people, put them in your yard, leave them there for 30 years, there's a chance that 10 of them might get cancer from your yard. So we take all these numbers and we put them in a calculation. Now I don't expect you to read this, but what I do want you to see is, there's a slope factor I was talking about for cancer. You go down to cancer down here, they use the reference dose. You know, if you give a mouse 100 milligrams per day, you got to do all the uncertainty factors. numbers I just showed you are in Michigan's calculations to determine screening levels for 24 hours a day, 350 days a year, for 30 years. So we put it all together and we get these numbers. Does everyone understand that? Does that make sense? Okay, my second objective. I'm going to put those two together. The concept of the exposure unit and the concept of real-life sampling. So this is a house that I made up. This is the street, this is the sidewalk, here's the house. Here's the front yard, the side yard, and the backyard. This little red spot right here is a chemical of concern that's above screening levels. Now, the question is, how much time do you spend in that area of your yard? Do you spend 24 hours a day, 350 days a year, for 30 years? In one spot on your front yard? Yes?
I mean, it looks like a gravel road that somebody's driving up and down that and dust it blow right in your nose.
True. But for this direct contact screening, but that's inhalation. That's a different number on that table. For direct contact, it means someone's sitting in that spot of the yard, touching the soil, eating it, playing with it, whatever. For 350 days a year, 24 hours a day, for 30 years. It doesn't happen. No one's going to sit in one spot of their yard forever. So what we like to do is break up the yards into what's called an exposure unit. There's more of a chance of you being exposed to your front yard instead of a spot in your yard, or your side yard, or your backyard. Michigan Part 201 and EPA defines an exposure unit as a quarter acre for residential properties. We, with what we're about to talk to you about in a few minutes, are talking about breaking up your yard into areas. Areas that can be remediated as an entire section. A section that you can be exposed to. Instead of one little spot in your yard, you're exposed to your front yard. You gotta remember, when you look at these screening levels, they're based on 24 hours a day, 350 days a year, for 30 years. That's not realistic. Because I can tell you right now, because everyone's sitting in this room, you're not home right now. So if you've taken off that 24-hour exposure. These numbers are highly protective. It's a starting point. What this means, when we go in to sample your yard and we look in these tables, that number is a starting point. If your concentration of contamination is below that number, we're done. If your level of contamination is above that number, we need to do more work and see what's really there. So does everyone understand what goes into a screening level? Does it make sense? You understand what the exposure unit is and the concept of real-life sampling? Of what we really need to look at, not a bit here and a bit here and a bit there, because you're never exposed to bits and pieces, you're exposed to the whole thing. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but the whole thing of it is, it's based on an assumption.
Right. Based on an assumption. What part? The screening level itself is based on assumptions.
Yes, everything is based on an assumption.
Right.
I have no problems with the technology, with the understanding, but the whole thing of it is, it boils down to a simple fact, it's based on an assumption.
Now, could I come to your house, interview you, and find out, okay, how much time do you actually spend in your front yard? Every single day for the last 30 years. And I could sit there and do a calculation. I could take all these assumption numbers out and put your real life numbers in there. And I can develop a screening level for you. I could do that.
I believe that.
But these numbers that we have, these screening levels, are, well, I can't say worst case scenario, but it's a maximum scenario you could actually come up with. But that's what these numbers mean. It's a starting point to protect you.
Like I said, I primarily understand the concept, but it still boils down to the fact that everything is based on an assumption. And
which is why I'm here, to let people know, don't get afraid of these numbers. When you see a hot spot in your yard that's above the screening levels, yeah, it means that we have a little bit more work to do, or maybe a lot more work to do. But it's not something that you should be utterly terrified of walking out in your yard because someone said you have a spot in your yard that's over screening level.
I agree totally. That spot in the yard, basically, you're only going to be exposed to it maybe a hundredth of your lifetime.
Right. But people tend to take these screening levels and think these numbers are law. And if it's above that number, we have to clean it up right in that spot now. And it really doesn't mean that. It means that we have to do more work.
Do I understand?
Good.
Like I said.
So how did you figure out to divide everything by 10 twice? How did that all come about?
That is a policy and scientific thing that is way above my pay grade.
Because even doing that, do we really know for sure that we've come up with the correct starting point?
It is a safety factor. They call them uncertainty factors, but in real life, it's a safety factor.
Well, yeah, but do we really know? I mean, safety suggests that, okay, we're all going to be safe, and this is the way it is. But do we really know?
You can't do trials on humans. We can't test.
I've looked for volunteers.
On humans to get that answer.
Right. So what they'll do, for instance, they'll choose a species, let's say a rabbit, and maybe the eyes of the rabbit are really the closest thing to human eyes, but they're still not human.
Right.
So they throw the number 10 is thrown in as just the safety factor. Like, is there a good scientific number why they chose 10 and 7? No, not really. But they're saying, you know, we're not rabbits, so therefore we're going to divide by 10.
Well, the reason I ask it that way is it reminds me of when, you know, the PVB thing happened. The chromatographs, or how do you say it? Chromatographs. There you go. We're only able to register down to a certain number. And so the wisdom of the day said, well, since that's as low as we can go, that's safe. And then they continued on as they did, and then it was discovered afterwards that, darn, you know, we're just still not getting rid of this PVB thing, and it's still getting to be a problem. And then they developed some more machinery that would test even lower. And it got lower and lower and lower. And at one point they thought, well, you know, this is great, you know, but then they had to keep lowering it. And before it was all said and done, it was just a fraction of a ppm versus where they started with 1%. And so is something similar happening here with this?
It's a little bit different in that, you know, the 10, 10, 10, 3, the safety factor progression, which you mentioned, you can get a maximum of 3,000 mole factor safety. And there's scientific judgment that's applied chemical by chemical in assigning those safety factors and developing various screening levels. And that's based on best science today. Science is not perfect. And your analogy to the PVB methodology improvements is a good one, because what that instructs us is that science and technology continually improve our ability to quantify the chemicals, but also to assess, as Keith mentioned, the toxicity assessment done in the lab, that science continues to improve as well. In the absence of knowing exactly what the uncertainty factor is, the protective safety factors are assigned based on peer review of the best science available, and that's where you'll see these range from 10 to 3,000 wide in developing these screening levels.
So, based on what you're telling me then, Theo, we are going to have 5-year reviews here, right? So then, sometime down the road, if we learn more about what we're doing here, and you've essentially cleaned up the neighborhoods to what today you figure is safe, the door opens again and we come back.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. Dachshund.
Yeah.
Dachshund is a perfect example of what's happening in the new Dachshund reassessment that has been recently published, that it's lowered, you know more about it now, but it's lowered the numbers, and we've had to reevaluate some sites based upon this new information. So, you know, that's kind of tells you in terms of that it has happened.
And it's going to be happening with lead sites too. So.
It happened in
it's encouraging and comforting as a community to know that you're gonna come back in here, and if the technology exists, you'll come back in here and make it even better. And that's what I'm hearing you say, is that right?
There is new information that shows that when we cleaned up to the residential properties, that there's new information out there that shows that that isn't protected anymore. And yes, you know, we are going to do that. That's right in the 5-year review policy, and that's part of our whole process. And as I said, the dachshund is the good example of it that just happened recently.
It's actually written in the circle, if any new information that comes to be available that questions the human health and protectiveness of the remedy, the agency must react, assess, at least evaluate it.
But the 5-year reviews that we've seen don't gather new data, they just rely on the old.
Well, you haven't got a site where we've been completely done. You know, I mean,
this was done.
Well,
But the toxicology is done at a national level.
Right. You know, you've just got a portion done, but let's say, for example, we're all done.
No, we were all done in 1982.
No, we're not.
We were all done, and there were 5-year reviews done, and they were all based on already published data. There was nothing new was gathered for those 5-year reviews.
But you're looking at what we know. After we get done with the cleanup, okay? We know what's in the soil, what's left. Maybe nothing, maybe whatever, X amount. If new information comes that says that what we clean the soils up to at X amount, okay, is not protective, then we come back in and redo that, okay? So the data, we have the data there, okay? So we don't need to get new data. We know what was there when we finished. But this new science comes that says, okay, this isn't protected.
5's no longer protected.
5's no longer protected.
Now it's 1.
No, it's 1. And as I said, the dioxin is a perfect example of what's happening right now for us. Of course, a lot of controversy with that, and you know, but that gives you kind of a general idea.
The purpose of the 5-year review is not to reassess the toxicology of the. You won't see a DDT toxicology reassessment coming out of a 5-year review process. Is that maybe what you were hearing at? Yeah, that's like Jim was saying. Those are programmatic, national level, more science-based than review-based.
And the actual one's taken some 20 years.
We laugh because it's just been a
But if something happens between once Tom is done with this remedy and the next 5 years, where this number for DDE or something changes, then next time we'll have to go back and address it.
Melissa, I have a question.
Okay, got a question. Yes.
Yeah, at a couple of other places where I'm working, they've conducted 5-year reviews during the process of the cleanup, because these are projects that have gone on a long time, and we can anticipate the same sort of thing might be here. So after the record of this decision is signed, we can expect that in 5 years there's going to be an assessment of the progress of the cleanup to date, right?
No. The actual 5-year review, there's going to be one done this summer that looks at the site. Okay? We do it from 5 years. There's a statutory, if you have a site that has a record of decision and it's post-SARA, okay? Authorization 84, okay, or 86. There's a requirement to do a 5-year review every 5 years after the start of construction. Okay, so I've got another one I'm going to be doing this summer. Okay.
For the 82.
No, for the whole site. One of the big things with this is going to be making the decision that we're going to go downstream and do an RIFS downstream. The conclusion will be for OU1 is to implement the remedy. OU2, we have data, sediment data that we've gathered. Okay, we'll be evaluating that in that document. Okay, it's for the site-wide. So, and then 5 years from now, there'll be another one. Okay, so it goes, so it isn't just after the ROD. The trigger date is this 5 years after the start of construction.
Okay, you get that, Peter?
Yep.
Okay.
But remember, that's statutory. There are sites where, I have sites that are really, really old, older than, because Velskol has, because we have records of decision with it, that it triggers the 5-year review. I have older sites that we had something called policy reviews, that because it isn't required in the law, we still do them, but it isn't like mandatory, okay? This one is mandatory, the statutory review.
But let me ask this question. As you progress, every year or every 2 or 3 years, you become more and more skilled at determining what is toxic and what isn't, because the technology basically expands that much.
Well, I'm going to tell you, we have over, I got to remember these numbers. We have over 300,000 chemicals in the world today, and the number keeps expanding. We have toxicity data on about 10%.
That's what I'm saying. Right. Basically, and as time goes on, you become more and more skilled at determining the toxicity level of these chemicals. Am I wrong?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into it. Jane said, well, the chemical industry, but...
The chemical industry has been fighting for years to not have toxicity levels figured out for various chemicals.
They're a bunch of jerks.
He's a former Dow employee.
There's another limiting factor here too, and we brought it up. These are toxicology for an individual compound that we're looking at, individual numbers. And we all know that when you go to a pharmacist, they tell you, what are the drugs that you're taking?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, you have to understand that too.
Right. There's a,
So,
it's a
the synergistic effects. I mean, if you're taking one blood pressure medicine and you end up taking something, an antibiotic, the pharmacist says, hey, no, you can really hurt yourself.
That's right. Yeah. So there's it's a criticism. Right, there's a criticism. I mean, the factors of safety, and that's why I wanted to come to talk about the multiple factors of safety, the conservatism in the process. But, the synergistic effects, EPA is working on that, trying to develop better risk assessment methods. So, that's why they put these layers. And believe me, there was a PRP here. They hate the conservative nature of us. They hate it. They fight us. I mean, as Jim knows, when he used to work for the MDQ, you try to work on a risk assessment with a company, you're talking about a battle. And that's God's honest truth. It's a battle. So
we're just as skirmish.
Can I take a break? And I'm going to ask, Peter, apparently I can't have 2 phone calls at the same time, so I'm going to hang up with you and see if I can get a hold of Ed, and then I will call you back as soon as we're done with Ed, if that's okay.
Sorry to me.
Okay, so I'm going to hang up and try to get Ed, and if I don't, I will call you right back.
I'm going to go get a glass of water.
Okay, we'll talk to you in a minute. Because Ed did say he was going to call at 8, and Ed, so. But I can't tell if I'm getting him anyway, so. Here.
It should line up if he's online.
Yeah.
I mean, it should have already gotten a signal.
I didn't get anything. All I got left over is the one from last night.
Yeah, the little thing in the right-hand corner that says he's online.
The Ed?
Yeah. 800 Facebook.
And if you ring him, you should either answer or you won't.
I like it though.
No, it won't ring him. And I know that's what he told me was his username.
Oh, you haven't got his, you're not his friend? You know what I mean?
It's so different from the last time I used this, it's not even funny.
Oh, this is the new version?
I don't know.
I didn't upload that new version.
I got the new version over here. Remember tried calling me yesterday.
50 to 10 parts per billion. Yeah, so.
And
sometimes they go
I keep
higher.
getting this message even though because I put him in my contact list.
You call him on his cell phone.
I don't have a cell phone. They can't find this type of thing. See, no contact. And when I tried to
It's less than 5 years.
That's
Nobody
like
told me it was.
Remember Crash Accounting?
It is.
There's like naturally occurring, it's like, it's a novel in its background. You know, I don't know if that's.
That was actually a big problem for a lot of water suppliers around the country. Because they actually went
That,
from 50
you
to
get different
5.
people there. He said,
So they all said, we're doing coagulation and microfiltration right now, and we can't get below 10. So you're gonna make us go to 5, and then we'll back up to 10.
That's one of the things though that, you know, when you see the water, you know,
You guys kind of have to address, because there is, you know, anywhere from 5
Alpha
to
does
10.
have arsenic issues with some of the water.
MCL is 10.
Right.
Right.
So it was 10. And it went from 50.
It was 50 about 9 years ago.
Now, do you still, are you able to use the, well, in the old days you could use B8, that's available. So, that's available.
That's BAT.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a little different, I think, for safe drinking water.
According to this, that's 15.
That's what he said. Oh, that'll change it.
Our water has 10. Good thing we're getting up on water.
Not a problem, but I needed the rest. Residential sampling, I'm John Cutter, the name on the top. This is Chuck Roth. We work with a small technical group in the US EPA called the Fields Group. We've been there about, 15 years. There's 3 of us. We have a small grant. We hire young, extremely bright people. They're able to actually do work instead of EPA bureaucracy stuff, so it's really a joy. So Chuck and I and Brian, who's not here, have been doing this type of work for quite a while. So proposed type of sampling that we would do for a residential site like this is called incremental composite sampling. So conceptually the concept is I have an area that I'm interested in, an exposure unit, for instance, using case jargon. The best way to get a value for that, to understand what is basically the average value in that area, is to take a bunch of small samples, the same volume, mix them together extremely well, and then sample that. That tells me what I have for that area. And that's incremental. Before it used to be called composite sampling. The concept is I've taken one sample, or I send one sample off to the lab, right? That one sample is composed of multiple increments, versus I go to your yard, I either randomly created a point, or I close my eyes and throw a jar behind me and it lands in your yard, and boom, I take a sample there. In both cases, I have one sample that I sent to the lab. And the incremental sampling gives us more information. Conceptually, this is what it looks like. So this is my area of interest, my exposure area here. For incremental sampling here, I have 9 increments. I'm going to collect all 9, put them together, larger volume, mix them up really well, send it to the lab. The other way traditionally people have done this type of sampling is to put one here randomly or whatever, or a couple, and send those. So I still have one to the lab, right, from both of them, but the one on the left gives me a lot more information to describe that entire area. So that's why incremental composite sampling is quite popular for doing this. Other terms that have been used to describe all of this are MIS, ISM, composite, particulate sampling, etc. The point I kind of want to highlight here is that historically this type of sampling came from the mining industry. And in mining, it's really important. These guys are really trying to get the bang for their buck. They're trying to save money. So I've gone and I've dug something up, and I put it in a truck. Do I want to send that truck to be processed for silver, or do I want to just send it off and dump it in the tailings pile? So the method that they came up with for sampling over years and years and years is incremental sampling, as a way to decide whether this truck load is worth processing or not. It has been accepted. Recently, MDEQ accepted this. US EPA has accepted it for quite a while. USACE, which is the Army Corps, and then Jim is a member of the Interstate Technology Regulatory Council. They have a huge document that really explicitly states how to do this. The US EPA also has something specific for dioxin that they've put together. Various states have accepted it as a sampling. So the concept that we want to get across, and Keith mentioned it, is traditionally US EPA and MDEQ considers a quarter acre, which is pretty much, a residential lot. That's a decision unit or an exposure unit. That is what we would consider, it's either dirty or it's clean. So for this site, we decided to break it down into slightly smaller areas. So our decision units are going to be less than the size of someone's yard. Most likely, we might do a parkway, which is, you know, between your street and your sidewalk, would be considered its own unique exposure unit. The front yard would be another exposure unit, and the backyard would be a third exposure unit. So the decisions we would make is the parkway's dirty, it gets cleaned, the front yard's not, it stays the way it is. That's the logic. Conceptually, this is what it looks like. In this case, we were looking at front yard, side yard, backyard. Each is.
Ed is calling.
Ed is calling.
Okay.
So
It's close to God. It's close to God. I mean, he's.
It's Ed McMahon with your check.
You know that big hook in that ball built? Here, pull off.
Can we record the time? Because this is going to be a very big point in my life. Are we on camera?
This is,
good, thank God.
This is like we're being in the history department at the college.
So I was just about to get to the good part.
Oh,
good. There's stuff that zooms in from the side.
Let me talk to Ed and tell him to call me back in about 10 minutes. 10, 15
Mike.
minutes.
Keep
Okay,
him
thanks.
on. I think we better just keep him on.
Do you want?
Let him hold on.
Peter,
yeah, just let him hold.
I'm going to get him and tell him to call me back in about 10 minutes.
Whichever you want to do.
Okay.
Make it 20.
We have some talking to do here too.
Ed?
Might not answer it soon.
Maybe it needs to be a new rule that you have to be present to present.
Ed, are you there?
Well, it's your group. You're in charge.
I take suggestions. Okay, Melissa, we're gonna have John continue, right?
No, just a second. I haven't gotten Ed yet.
Where is he getting?
New Mexico.
Oh, they got technology.
They got
They got internet out there.
Ed? Are you there? I can't hear you if you are. If you're there, you need to go in and check your settings to make sure that you're communicating properly with your microphone, because I'm not hearing you. But in the meantime, we're in the middle of one of the EPA presentations, so if you can check your settings and do the test call to make sure they're working, and call us back in about 20 minutes, they should be done with their part of the presentation.
See you, Ed.
You can also send me a chat. Send me an email. I just said, got my email up from you. But I can't hear you.
Okay, let's go.
Okay.
Okay, we're moving on. So, one of the ideas we came up with, we were trying to explain what we call like a bank
Okay,
for a
we're continuing.
buck thing.
Pete,
So-
why don't you go back one slide, just
Yeah.
a little bit of review and then.
So Keith mentioned this concept of an exposure unit. An exposure unit, from a human health standpoint, this is where I expect to spend my time. And in general, we do that for an entire residential area, it'd be front yard, backyard, side yard. In this case, we're breaking it down into smaller sizes, and we're going to call those exposure units or decision units. We're making a decision on them. So conceptually, for instance, the front yard would be its own decision exposure unit. The side yard would be its own exposure decision unit, the same as the backyard. So the concept of incremental composite sampling is, it kind of gives you a bang for your buck. So conceptually, you are getting a lot more information from doing incremental sampling than discrete sampling. And so I'm trying to kind of explain how it goes. For instance, perhaps you created a sample design where I'm going to take 3 samples in someone's yard. So those I randomly throw in someone's yard and I collect 3 pieces of information. That's what I got out of this person's yard, and I'm going to use that information to decide whether this guy's yard is clean or dirty. With incremental sampling, I'm still going to collect 3 samples. What I'm really doing is I'm sending 3 samples to the lab. But those 3 samples are composed of a bunch of subsamples. So for instance, in the front yard, in this case, I'm collecting 11 increments. I'm taking small volumes of material, 0 to 6 inches, exact same volume material, I mix it all together, and that's my 1 sample. But that 1 sample was made up of little samples all over the yard. So it ends up being much more representative. And hence you can kind of see why it was used in the mining industry. You know, I dig this stuff up, I got to make a decision whether this pile goes to be processed or not. So if I take a bunch of small samples from it, I have a much better idea of what's in that material. So What you also find is you're getting the exact same results. If I had done discrete sampling on this case, or if I had done composite incremental, I get the same. In this case, here's my exposure unit. I take 9 increments. I mix those all together. I send them to the lab. I get 10 parts per million. Had I gone and collected each of these 9 individually, sent them to the lab, and then mathematically averaged them after the fact, I get the same number. But the logic is that I have only sent 1 to the lab versus 9 to the lab. So this is incremental composite sampling. Yes, Walt.
Who used this incremental composite sampling? Would there be any orange fences out there?
Will you repeat that? I'm sorry.
If we use this incremental composite sampling, would there still be any orange fences out there in that 10 yards?
Well, we would never use orange. We'd probably use like a nicer color.
They're out there already. But if you use this incremental composite sampling,
Yeah.
would those orange fences still be there?
Right, so like if I had gone to somebody's house, like I'd gone to your house, and I did your parkway, your front yard and your backyard, and your parkway is above, let's say, 5 parts per million, we would put, well, Scott Cornelius would have put orange fences all around your parkway, your front parkway.
And you
so
would just dig it up.
We would just, yeah, well, hopefully, yes, we would dig it up. The logic is we're trying to make a decision for an exposure unit, as we were talking before. It's like I'm in my backyard, I'm not in just one location of my backyard, it's my entire backyard. So if I'm trying to quantify what's actually in my backyard, this is the best way that we have found to quantify that, is to, go back and do this type of sampling.
That's a question I
Are you asking about the existing
had. The existing orange fences.
The existing fences are going to be remediated no matter what.
Right, but if they were to use incremental composite sampling in the original, would the orange fences be there today? Probably not.
Probably not, but you know,
Walt,
the fence issue is the state's issue.
My answer to you is like,
Scott about that.
so
I guess
Scott
his
took a
question is
sample.
whether would we have remediated that or not.
Right.
Yeah. I don't,
And the answer is probably.
But the
Probably
decision would have been for the entire parkway or the front yard, as
Right.
opposed to, like we remember we kind of tortured Gary earlier today, this concept of like, I go and I take a sample here and it's high. Then I have a big question. So where do I start digging? Do I dig 1 foot away or do I do more sampling? Then I do more sampling, and I did it in 4 directions. 2 were high, okay? So these 2 are fine, presumably, right?
My question was, if we use this incremental composite sampling, would those orange fences in them 10 yards be there?
We probably would be remediating the parkways on every one, because there would have been a sufficient number of samples from the area that's high, that's in the orange area now, to give you a value greater than 5 parts. Well, that was the BPP, so.
BPP is 1.2.
1.2.
But just to put it.
So it would have exceeded the criteria.
All right.
By virtue of the fact, it's not, when you start thinking dilution, you have to also think in terms of the area that you're trying to represent, okay? It's not dilution in the sense that, it's only dilution if you assume that's the only place that's ever hot. And that's just not a practical assumption, okay? The assumption is that may be the hottest area that they found, but the rest of the parkway has some too, and on average, if you have something that high there, on average, you're going to have a high enough number.
I think one thing.
It's not practical to think that you're going to miss it.
One of the things we're going to do, Walt, is when we do the sampling, we're going to excavate the area within the orange fences. Okay, verify that to make sure it meets the cleanup criteria. And then we're going to do additional sampling in the areas outside. Let's say, for example, you have the parkway, you have a small area in that parkway. Let's say, for example, you know, like 1/8 of that parkway. Okay, we're going to excavate that, verify, make sure it's clean, and then we're going to sample the rest of that parkway,
Okay.
but not include the area that we cleaned up.
Right.
Okay, so we're kind of biasing it, you know, because we feel that the orange fences have been up there, it's, you know, people have dealt with them, we're going to clean those areas. If we were starting from ground zero overall, it probably would have been a different approach.
All right.
Okay?
Sorry, Walt, I didn't
Sorry,
mean
it's
to
my
torture you,
Italian coming out.
but just having trouble following.
All right.
So just to kind of get back, this is the end of the presentation, so we have those 10 properties, currently have the orange fences around them. So those are going to be dug up. But the rest of the property will be sampled using an incremental composite sampling approach to make a decision on, do I have to clean up the rest of the parkway? Do I need to clip the front yard? Do I clean up the backyard? The sampling will be at depth 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 18, 18 to 24. We may go deeper than that. And as I said before, we employ incremental composite sampling approach to that. Have any questions? Gary.
So how do you determine how many samples you're going to take in each one of your decision zones?
There's a couple ways to do this. People use rule of thumbs, so they have a number. The number is not, they've done some simulation studies, and I don't know how comfortable I feel with them, frankly. The problem we're running into is that some of the properties we're talking about they're pretty small. So if I use a parkway, and it's a really small parkway, the idea that I would collect, like, say, 15 or 10 in a small parkway, and then go to the front yard, which is 5 times greater in area, and then collect the exact same number. We may do that, we may not do that. Chuck and I have been looking more at using either a unique number or using sample spacing. And in kind of the area that we are in, it's called support. It's kind of a technical term, but it means that I'm collecting the same volume of material per area. So I can compare. So in small areas, I would collect fewer samples. In larger areas, I collect more samples. But in terms of the proportion of material that I'm sampling, it's proportional by area. So that's one.
How many holes are you going to poke into the parkway? How many holes are you going to poke? Can you give me some kind of reference?
The number would be anywhere between like 5 and 30. But that's something that we're still working on. We're trying to understand how many we want to take. And then once we take those, to try to quantify what we would call uncertainty, meaning just because I go in your front yard and I collect, let's say, I poke 10 holes in your parkway. I send that to the lab, and it's a 4.9, right? For, what is it, DET?
5.
Yeah. Okay. Total. So it's 5. If it's a 4.9, do I say you're clean? Oh yeah, Gary's front yard is fine. It's close. So normally what we do is we apply a safety factor. And it's not just a number 10, but what you try to do is you can collect samples and then individually have them analyzed, and you compare those range of values, and you're basically getting a plus-minus factor. So you're trying to hedge a little bit. So that I don't say 4.9 is less than 5, boom, I'm not doing it.
Hello?
So it would be a number, let's say 4.7, something like that. So anything 4.7 and above, boom, that's considered dirty, something has to be done.
Yeah.
So in getting to that 4.7,
we are in the middle of a presentation by another group. Can you call me back
you
in
guys are
about 5
going to
minutes?
establish,
Can we just stay on
the earlier
Oh, yeah, you can
conversation.
listen, yeah, you can listen.
You guys are
Peter's on
going
the
to
other line
establish a
listening.
number,
I can't find Peter.
whether it be 5,
Okay, so I'm gonna leave you.
Okay,
whatever.
good.
Yeah,
He's still,
A fraction
Yeah,
there.
okay, yeah.
right.
And that's going to be determined by
Okay.
variability. So all these other little things that you look at to try to determine. So where my mind kind of went with all of this, so correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you will, judging by earlier conversation.
Can we say you're wrong yet, or do we have to wait?
I told these guys were funny.
So anyway,
Yeah.
you go out there and you poke 10 holes.
Yeah.
We're just going to say that the number is 5. Okay, that's the number criteria.
Ed?
Let's go in
You
there.
go punch 10 holes.
When they get
When
some
you
noise,
average them
right?
all together,
Yep.
you end up with a 5. But does that mean that since you poke 10 holes, that you would multiply 10 times 5, because you could have had a 50 out there and 9 zeros. So now is the new number 50?
You could play the number game and say the absolute worst possible thing that could happen would be a value of 50, and everything else is essentially 0.
So in the illustration I just gave,
Yeah.
you'd clean up that whole yard.
Yeah. Remember, because we're making the decision on that whole area. That's the lot. That's my exposure. taking, you know, a certain number of discrete samples, I send those to the lab. Now I'm trapped by this, where do I draw the line? What do I dig up? Where do I make it, the division between the high ones and the low ones? And what you're gonna find is that you're gonna have a mix of highs and lows, and now it becomes what we call like a salt and pepper problem, where I mixed all the salt and pepper I wanna get rid of, the salt's fine. I don't know, you know, you end up having to dig it up.
Okay, so I want to give one more scenario that's the same, but I'm just going to use a little different numbers.
Okay.
So you go out there and you hold 5 holes, take 5 samples. Your cleanup number is still 5. That's the number, whatever you guys call it. And you end up with a 1. But you took 5 samples. So 1 times 5 is 5. You clean up that yet?
No.
Because it's not over 5.
Yep.
All right, so if it turned out it was 1.1, then it would be 5.5. You clean the yard.
No, it'd still be under, but there may be an area of the yard that's over 5. We are accepting the fact.
Same math as I did when I did 10 of them.
Right.
Right.
If I'm over 5, I'm 5.5, I'm over 5.
But that
Well,
wasn't what triggered the action. The action was the first fact that you were at 5.
5, not the number of composites.
If you
So
had
for
said
example-
4.9, we would have said no. And your high number would have been 49. But you have it may be a difficult thing to accept at some level, but you have to understand the small amount of volume that could be at that value in order for you to get that.
We also
It would
have
have
to
to have been a
accept-
very,
we
very
also
small
have to
area.
accept that there could be a large volume out there.
No,
Just
because
as equally, if you
that's
think
the
there's one
purpose of
little
the
spot,
incremental
there has to be a
sampling.
huge spot.
No, because you're
That's-
doing it over
That's kind of a, yeah.
You
That's
could be
the-
50 feet apart on your samples.
No, if that's our main concern, then we would do as many increments as possible. We would do as many as 30 in a small area, if that's our main concern. Because that would reduce how far apart they are and reduce the amount of the size that any possible single value could possibly be in that area.
Gary's point, Gary's point is,
Yes.
someone goes out in his front yard and they collect 10 composites and it comes back and it's 5. Boom, we're gonna clean it. Let's say it comes back, it's 4.5. That's well below 5, we're not gonna clean it up. There will be, like if we had sent all those 10 individually to the lab, there's probably 2 that are above 5. So yes, they are above 5. The objective, and Keith was talking about this, is I'm trying to get a really good estimate of what my exposure is for the entire area. It does mean I will have some areas, sometimes above 5, that are there, but because when I put it all together, it's less than 5, I don't clean it up. But then your point is what if I have this big area? That's why you hit it by taking these incremental sampling. You're going to hit those high values. If it's like a third of your yard, you're going to hit them.
But see,
And
that's
they
why
will have
we've
an
added,
effect.
that's why we've added 3 decision units, at least 3, per property, because we've even shrunk it further and separated that decision. Okay, so it makes it even another step of being more conservative. So, like when you look at some of the guidance that's out there now for docs, they look at a 1/4 acre, okay? Not like whatever a parkway is, it's much smaller, or the front yard. You know, mainly the lots are a 1/4 acre. We're breaking that even into thirds, so we have more ability to make judgments on the individual property. And so we've tried to add, as I said, I told these guys, let's add additional conservatism into this. So, you know, even though there may be an area of 5, we're trying to make it so it's as conservative as possible.
But the whole
I want to
thing
get back to the same thing that, you know, I gave 2 scenarios. They were exactly the same. The method of math was still the same. One of them was yay and the other one was nay. And they all ended up at 5. So I don't understand how I got a yes once and a no next time.
Oh, remember that if we have a cleanup goal of 5, in one example, right, I collected 10, right, and it ended up being 5 parts per million, right, from all those 10. So conceptually, I could have a situation where 9 were essentially 0 and 1 was 50, and 50 divided by 10 gives me 5. That was your the other example, you bumped it down to what, like 5 composites or something?
5 composites.
And then you got,
one.
and you got 1, but the cleanup goal is still 5. So even though.
I got a spot out there, it is a 5.
Yep.
Yes.
That's
Yep.
above cleanup.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be left, because the average of the entire area that we're sampling is less than 5.
And what if that sample was 6?
It's still, the idea
I
is
mean,
that.
what if you end up at 6 instead of 5?
Well, then it'd be
The
Oh, no, no,
average,
you clean it up, yeah.
if the average is 5.0, it's being cleaned up. It has to be under 5 for it to not be cleaned up.
Was it, sorry,
the whole yard.
the whole, yeah, or that whole area?
Decision.
The whole concept is, if you've got one spot, how often is a person gonna stand in that one spot to get that contamination?
Exactly right.
Right, but here, you know, we are really talking apples and oranges, because the 5 parts per million is the ecological standard, not the human
Right, but it's the same
standard.
logic for a
It's the
robin.
same
How
logic.
often is a robin gonna feed
Well,
in one small corner, a
I got
5-foot
an
corner of the
example
yard?
in Terry's yard. They're hanging out at the, where the sump pump discharges and they're dying, so.
No, we don't, no. I have a question.
We do have to be
It's very
careful
difficult
about
to-
over-extrapolating.
To make a decision on an entire area based on the speculation of one thing. I think we could probably come up with a number of possible explanations for why the birds are being found near that. One possibility is that after toxicity, they may be extremely thirsty. I know with decon for mice, one of the kind of the problems you have with it, if you poison your mice with decon, they essentially die craving liquid, okay? And they will chew through things to try to get to water at the last, with their last gas.
Well, I have the whole
It may be
river
possible
over
that
there
there's
they
something
can go
like
drink
that,
out
you
of.
know?
It's not just myself.
Well, right, I mean,
Well, the point is we don't-
there's areas
no,
around your property that.
But they're not gonna fly to the river to try and find water.
The question is where they're feeding, not where they're dying.
They're all
That's what you have to think
Go to
about.
my sump in my yard and drop dead there.
Right.
Where they.
But you still have to think about where they're feeding, not where they're dying. And they're not feeding in a 5-foot square area. They're not getting all of their worms in one corner of the property.
Their toxicity or what's killing them is not an acute thing. It's not like, I got this exposure, and then boom, they die. It's a cumulative exposure from multiple areas. That's how.
Yeah.
That's how.
And I gotta speculate too that we can't solve the problem in your backyard right now because we really don't have the data to draw conclusions. I mean, we're all speculating. It's all speculating.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna give you any comfort until we figure this out.
Right.
And Tom says he's gonna do something. I mean, at least
That's right.
you're gonna look into this, right?
That's right.
So,
I mean, as I said,
Yeah.
I'm very thankful, as I told you, I'm
Yeah.
so thankful that you got these birds and got them analyzed. I mean, it helps me, okay? It helps me because it helps me get money. That's why I'm looking, to get money. Please don't quote me in the paper, okay? I mean,
And when he says get money, he doesn't mean for himself.
I
I
don't
just
mean
want to
myself, I
clarify
mean to get
this.
funding for the Phelps project.
Thank you.
You know, worst first.
Context, yeah.
Yeah.
Walt has been very patient.
I got a question, and an idea, anyway. I like your incremental sampling. Your composite where you mix them all together, you know, I believe is solution by dilution. But if you took your incremental, each one of your samples, and you put a GPS number on it, all right, then you could go right back to the hotspot. It might save
That's
you a lot
another
of
really
thinking.
good question.
We love that question.
Yeah, I'm kind of the GPS side of this
There you
equation
go.
anyway. Here's one of the problems you have. Okay, GPS is great, but it's not as great as you think it is. Okay?
Right? They're laying out buildings with it.
They are laying out buildings with it, yes. But for the most part, GPS isn't that accurate.
Okay.
It's plus or minus less than a meter, 3 feet.
Right, well,
Okay,
3 foot's
so-
pretty damn close.
Well, when it comes to yards, 3 feet's quite a bit,
Yeah.
okay?
It's like a 6 foot. Now you're talking a diameter of 6 feet.
Right.
Right.
It's not as simple as you might think to go back. And you can ask anyone that's used GPS coordinates and a GPS to find like, you know, some utilities or things like that
Right.
end up being buried. It's like, yeah, you think you can find it, but it becomes a needle in a haystack. how you go around
I
this,
didn't
no
know
matter, no matter how you try to divvy it up, in the end, the decision's going to be made on some area. Whether that area is the size of what you can reach, or the size of the yard, or the size of the entire town, a decision's going to be made on some area, okay? We're saying that because of things like ecological risk analysis, human health risk analysis, the decision area that we are going to approach is based on the size of people's yards, okay? So people's yards are what we're going to remediate. So we don't need to know to the inch where a given increment is, because the whole thing's coming out anyway.
All right.
I just wanted to come back a little bit to the bird issue. And another thing that might be going on is that since there's 6 birds in another lot, and there's a story that ran in that Morning Sun where there were, the woman last year had 7 dead starlings. This year she has piles of them. Maybe they're dropping all over, and your yard included. But
Well, no, she's got the brain data that shows
Those
the
are
DD.
starlings.
That's a different thing.
Too. These are robins, and I
Right.
have the necropsy records on them, so I know what the poisoning is.
well, I'm not
from.
saying that. I'm saying they may be dropping from that same poison all over the area.
No, we have
The
chemicals.
bird that I found
Not from the sump is all.
was a starling. And the starlings will cover quite a large area.
To feed. The data that Terry generated are very specific to the chemical.
I wasn't disputing that. I was saying you might have lots of birds dying from those same chemicals, though.
That's,
So you're saying that
that's what we want to collect information.
I'm saying that I'm just saying that the source of the poison might not be her lot, even though she's got a lot of dead birds there. There
Yes,
might be a lot of
you're
dead
right.
birds all over the area, all dying from the same poison.
Yeah,
And it
you're
just
right.
happens that you've had, however many you've had die there, but that might not be the only place that they're
Well, we
happening.
see some areas near Terry's property that are high in DDT. Okay, so there's a smoking gun. As Jim says, it's kind of a puzzle. You can't say that for certain. This is difficult to figure out. We're going to try our best to figure it out. But there is definitely soil data near her property that shows very high elevations of DDT that
Yeah.
could be affecting the robin. So we see that as, okay, that's one step that may guide us in the right direction, but that may be false. We don't know yet. We have to figure it out. There's an issue with their property. We're going to deal with it. It may take some time, but we're going to get there.
It's another piece of the puzzle.
Right, thank you, Peter. You took the words out of my mouth.
I think we better move on to Ed's
Okay.
delivery and. Yeah,
Okay.
you finished.
Oh, yeah, she had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay, just real quick,
Yes.
you had said it's not, Terry's Robins, you had said that it's not an acute thing, it's an
Oh, okay.
accumulative thing.
Yeah,
How do you know that? I mean,
Yeah,
did
okay.
that report say that?
that's Jim.
Well,
I spoke for Jim.
Yeah, there was actually a lot of research done on poisoning of robins back when DDT, there was basically no restrictions on its use. It was, one of the uses where it was very visible is when they were trying to protect elm trees from the vector, the beetle that spreads the elm disease. And robins were dying, and it was visible, people could see them. And they did very good work. They found out that when the birds migrated in, they were okay. It took a certain amount of time for them to build up the residues to levels from their exposures to the earthworms for them to start to die. The deaths would occur in the spring through, at best, early summer, and then you wouldn't see them dying again. What happens is the robin's diet shifts. They end up eating predominantly fruit in the later part of the season, and then they would migrate south or maybe migrate a short distance. So, it isn't something where this isn't the kind of compound where they would get such a large dose that it would kill them right off the bat. It's something that has to accumulate over a period of weeks at least. Yes.
Oh, no, go ahead, continue. I just want to, after you get done.
Oh, you
I
got
something to say.
another.
But it's weeks, it's not like years or.
No. Yeah, it's not years. But it's not.
How long does a robin live anyway?
Probably in nature, just a few years. Off the top of my head, I'm tempted to say 3 to 5 years, and 5 sounds too long to me.
Peter said 3 to 4.
Oh, okay.
So there's not a whole
Thanks,
lot
Peter.
of time. I mean, if they're coming in the spring,
Yeah.
At least one of these birds died at 12 months.
They were both 12 months.
Right,
both
and
of
they
those.
would have been fed as chicks, probably.
Worms.
well, they could have come from who knows where though.
Yeah,
When, by the time they get to Terry's,
yes. And in general, it's surprisingly enough, since DDT still is used in some tropical countries for malaria control, in general, they found that the non-migratory birds in the U.S. tend to have higher DDT levels than the birds that migrate. They think this is the result that so much DDT was used in the U.S. and it's still present in soils as a legacy chemical. This is something that surprised me when I.
and they're passing it on to the young, to the babies.
Yes, yes.
It's
that
in the
can happen too.
earthworms that they catch and they eat their babies. And one of the pictures she had was a young robin. It still had the speckles on its breast, so it wasn't a year old yet. It was just a matter of a month or 2
That's the one
months.
that.
But the main point is it takes a little while for it to accumulate. It's not like, cyanide where
Yeah,
you get too large of a dose of cyanide and you're dead within minutes. This is something that takes some time to build up.
I don't know, a couple weeks doesn't seem very long.
Right, but the point is where you find the birds is not necessarily where they got the lethal exposures. It's a bird's going to be it's going to cover quite a bit of territory, and even if the accumulation.
That's what makes
happens.
this sort of more
Melissa,
creepy
can
for
you hear
Terry
us?
because they
Yes.
come to her place to die. It's really, is that what bothered me?
She knows she has 3 nests
No.
on her property.
That's
So-
cemetery.
And we,
The birds are going to stay near to where their nests are. They'll keep coming back to that area more frequently than anywhere else. So,
Gary,
but their feeding area
you
is
can
larger
check on that
than
lawn,
per yard.
right?
Do you see
See
us?
if there's
No.
robins too. That would be interesting.
well, we heard tonight that there may be more yards. It's one thing, just sort of a sidebar, we're kind of interested
Yeah, well, here,
to see a little bit more.
Tom's gonna love me. Anyway, I just made a phone call to a buddy of mine. He was working in 1976 on the site, driving a dump truck. And I asked him if any of the truckers filled any low spots around St. Louis in the residential area. He says, some of them did, but I didn't. You're gonna love me, buddy.
Good answer.
All right, can
So
we
you
do
can
it?
check the rest of the town, buddy.
Okay, we're gonna listen to Ed's report because we're still like Ed, you got.
Yeah.
Okay, you can't see us.
We have no video, so all you can do is listen, so you'll have to be quiet because this is the most volume I have. Go ahead.
Tell them to turn up the volume on his end.
Okay, hi, I am actually Emily Johnson. I'm here with Dr. Lorenz right now, and I went to a conference in New York just a week or 2 ago, and it was held at the New York Academy of Medicine, and the purpose of the conference was focusing on healthy environments across generations, and it was put together by the Collaborative on Health and the Environment, which the Prime River Group is actually a part of, they basically addressed public dialogue on the impact of the environment on human health. And some of the supporting members were the AARP, the CDC, the EPA, the Kellogg Foundation, and several others. And it was really just a way for people to share what they were doing in their field to support human health across all different environments, across all different generations. Some of the things that I got to talk to some of them and listen to a lot of groups. Specifically, there's a group there called the Gray Panthers, and they talk about the connection between income level and the presence of hazardous waste sites in various communities, which I thought kind of related to what's going on in St. Louis. As well, they talked about the EPA or the EPA's denial of BPA, accepting that as like a toxic hazard material. And specifically, they talked a lot about the endocrine disrupting chemicals, and which I know we talk about a lot in the meetings, but also something called obesogens. And they found across different species, all species are seeing obesity, not just humans, and they're actually blaming that on chemicals, some of the chemicals which, we've found in the Superfund sites in St. Louis. And there was a member there. He was the dean of a public health school, and he provided a lot of information, which I'll bring back with me, on children's environmental health and the endocrine disrupting chemicals, as well as the obesogens, and hormone disruptors in women's health, and essentially just a lot about the studies and effects of chemicals. As well, I ran into a member from the Pesticide Action Network who attended the DDT conference, and they did remember they had heard of they did know of Alma College. They recognized me from the name and from the DDT conference, and they recognized Dr. Lorenz's name. So I think working more with them, forming more of a partnership, because they do recognize the work that's going on in St. Louis, and they do want to help. I did also talk to someone with the grassroots environmental education, and she gave me this book that talks about various chemicals in our environment and how we can choose, what we want to put around our family. And I know in the situation of St. Louis, that's not something that you're able to choose which chemicals your families are subjected to, but just more information that maybe we can hand out to the community. They're willing to provide the books for free, as many as we want, and just information. And the lady I was speaking to did want to start a partnership. She did want to hear more about the Superfund sites and the video that we produced a while back, talking about the Pine River. But essentially, there's a lot of good information. I just tried to get St. Louis's name out there and the Superfund sites, talking to a lot of different members there from all across the country. And there were a couple of EPA members there that I ran into, specifically hold on. I guess I can't find her name right now, but she was very involved in the conference. She didn't specifically recognize the St. Louis site, but there's a lot of sites across the country right now. And I guess I can open up for any questions if anyone has any. And I'm bringing back a ton of materials that I brought home from the conference.
Emily, are you going to be around in July to present at our July meeting?
Unfortunately, I will be in Africa in July, but I will be there for the August meeting.
Okay.
And so I did want to come back and maybe in person talk more about what I found, and maybe try to pull some stuff together and start actually creating a dialogue with some of the people I ran into. Are there any questions anybody has right now for me?
I don't see any.
One thing I guess I'll have some of the material.
Yeah.
I can bring the material. We have it here in New Mexico, and I guess I'll bring some of it back. So I'll have some of it in July.
Yeah.
So if you want to see like that book that Emily mentioned, they will make available to us in quantity.
Whatever
I can bring a sample of that and show you some of this material. There's some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of the information they'll be packed. They describe some information about studies done on different chemicals, and then they also give links to other studies that have been done. So I think just a lot of information that I pulled out of the conference.
Okay.
Yeah, the attendance list looks really impressive.
It was really impressive. I felt like I definitely needed a doctorate to be there.
I don't know whether Tom. Oh, no. But I don't know whether Tom even knows. But there was like Ramona Trovato from EPA and Kathy Sykes.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? That's the one you met. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What she's listed as senior advisor, U.S. EPA Washington, and he's listed as. Ramona Trovato is EPA Office of Research and Development. So, I mean, there were people from EPA.
Most of them were from the Research and Development offices.
Yeah, who were in support of this. So it's, it's information that EPA recognizes as valid.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a
Enjoy
safe trip
things.
home.
We can't believe you're still working at 9. There's only 7 here.
Yeah, we know. Or I know.
We support you in spirit.
All right.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Is Peter still on?
Which kind of spirits?
Yeah. Yes, Peter's still on.
That was singular, not plural.
Does he have any more questions?
Did you have any more questions, Peter?
No, I don't. I recognize it's the witching hour.
Okay.
That's good. All right, thank you, Peter, for being with us.
Well, good. I'm going to write you something, Jane, either tonight or first thing in the morning, and then we'll have a discussion with Tom and the team there.
Okay. Well, Dara,